So this is my friend Paul Retzler, new friend. I just met Paul recently.
Yep.
And I was introduced to Paul by Elizabeth Steele, who was the interim pastor and a good friend of mine from Geneva Presbyterian Church. So I got to know Paul just through that connection. Came to find out that he's right now exploring whether or not to pursue ordination in the Presbyterian Church.
Yep.
But he has been a pastor for many, many years, and I'll let him share more about that in a moment. Paul is here because of his experience, actually just being a pastor in an LGBTQ church, if I may call it that. I know it's open to anyone.
Yeah.
It's not just
Right.
exclusive.
No.
But it was a church, I think, primarily for folks who, I'm guessing, did not feel welcome at other churches.
Right.
So we'll hear a little bit more from Paul on that. And so what I'd like to do is turn it over to Paul, have him share a little bit about himself, his history, his background, and some of the things that you saw in this film that impacted you. And if you wanted to add anything, particularly from other things that you've read and seen.
Sure. Okay, well, good afternoon. It's nice to be here. Thank you for that introduction. And I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. First off, I'll just let you know I'm gay. I always have been. And but I grew up in a time when it wasn't really accepted like it is now. And so I lived in the closet. I was actually an athlete. I was a wrestler. I used to compete for the United States in Olympic-style wrestling, and doing martial arts and wrestling. So I was in a very uber masculine sport, and so I was petrified of being found out for being who I was. I never wanted to admit to myself who I was. I remember when I was young, in high school still, I knew I was different, but I didn't know what it meant to be different. And I heard the word homosexual, so I said, I gotta find out more about that word. So I went to the library, and when no one was looking, I looked in the dictionary, and I was turning A, B, C, G, H, O, homosexual. And I was shocked. That's me, I think. And but everything you saw on television or you heard about, it was so negative. And so I was really put in a dilemma because I was also a Christian. I was saved when I was 11. I had a born again experience when I was 11. I've loved Jesus my whole life. So I was put in that dilemma, a lot of gay people are, of questioning who I was as a person, my sexual orientation, and feeling like it was in conflict with my faith. And so I stayed in the closet until I was in college. And actually after college, I met my husband in high school, and we became a couple right after I graduated from college. So we've been together 35 years. And it was at that time that I was fortunate enough to meet another pastor who understood about the Bible and was able to explain it to me. And such a weight was lifted off my shoulders. It was a very similar experience to what they had here in 1946 of discovering the Bible had been misinterpreted, and it actually didn't condemn gay people. And so I was able to feel good about myself and my faith. And I always knew Jesus was not going to let go of me, though. I mean, I just knew it. I just said to myself, there's just no way he loves me too much. But I couldn't do something if I thought it was a sin. I wouldn't do it. And so, thank God, he brought me to a place, a pastor named Mark Elias. His church is still there. It's called Open Door Revival Center. It's a Pentecostal church in Bellflower. And he explained to me the clobber passages. And so I was really set free. And, I didn't follow my calling at first. I actually spent the next 10 years, I was working as an actor, actually, and I just got lucky to do that. But I just didn't like that. I didn't feel good in that field. There was a lot of things that I wasn't comfortable with as a Christian. And so I decided at that time that I needed to pursue what I felt like was my calling in life. And so I went back and I got my master's degree in theology or divinity, actually. And that's when I started a church. I started a church back then with a dear friend of mine, and a ministry reaching out to LGBT people. And so I did that for 15 years. We actually grew a really large ministry, a ministry actually called the Rainbow Gospel, and it reached out to LGBT people. And we've seen a lot of people be set free from that fear of being who they are and thinking God condemns them. We've seen a lot of people set free. We've seen people come to know Jesus too. And so it was really rewarding. And I'm glad I went to seminary also primarily because I wanted to understand the Bible. And so, you have to learn Hebrew and Greek in seminary. And so I really learned a lot about the subject matter, and I've done a lot of speaking on it. And I was glad Ryan asked me to be a part of this, and I would like to answer any questions we might have. And so,
great,
yeah.
Fantastic. We could get any number of people, I think, to be sitting up here too as well. Particularly representatives of any sort, a number of biblical studies and scholars and theologians and things, particularly because that's the topic we were covering. I am not a biblical scholar. That is a high bar. When folks like pastors try to claim that sometimes, you really don't know what you're claiming. It's like the guy who thinks they're watching the NBA and thinks they can compete. You're like, no, you're not that good. So I am not that. But I will say that everything that I've learned in my time throughout at Westmont College as a biblical studies emphasis, and then at Fuller Seminary, everything I saw here lines up with a lot of rigorous biblical scholarship in terms of this matter particularly. And I appreciated that. I appreciated this documentary for that reason. There's no Hail Marys in this thing going on. It's very solid in terms of a lot of the biblical scholarship. And that's why I just wanted to say that piece. That said, I want to be very clear. This is still, for some, as you interact with this, a matter of difficulty, particularly as you read the Bible or whatever tradition you grew up in. It's really difficult. It can be, and I want to acknowledge that because I don't want to put people in a place where they feel maybe backed into a corner if they're here today and they hear this and think, well, what if I don't agree with that? Or what if I want to argue about all of these things right now? I would first say that we're not doing a debate right now, right?
Right.
Comments are great. If you have, questions are the best. If you have any comments, that's fine. We probably won't interact so much. But I did love in the documentary, Sal, when he went up and shared, and he didn't really let the lady answer the question, but she did a great job of not necessarily engaging him in some sort of debate. And by the end, she just graciously and kindly thanked him for his comments. And I really appreciated that. I also appreciated how the dad went to the Reformation Project event that took place in Seattle. I got to know Matthew Vines a bit, who's the author of God and the Gay Christian, who runs I think it's annual Reformation Project event for LGBTQ Christians. Really, the whole thing is let's make sure that gay people know they can go to church, like that they're welcomed at churches. So we need churches to know that they need to be on this and get this done, without it being what's her the gal Roggio, Rocky. Her nickname is Rocky. What's her real name? Sharon, thank you. she mentioned going to churches and being told she was welcomed, but really found out pretty quickly that wasn't the case. So this Reformation Project has been a big impact on my life. And the book, God and the Gay Christian, has been an impact because he addresses the biblical passages and the theological pieces in this very rigorously as well. My former boss, who's now retired, was the one who encouraged him to start this. So that's how I got to know him through this, and it has been really powerful in that way. I say all that because I want to give you also time to think about the questions you might have. And I do want to say the questions will go to Paul by default, unless you have any questions for me, but I would love Paul, because I know you've spent much more time in this than I have. So
I'll do the best I can.
yeah. So we have a room mic right over here. You don't need to have a microphone in your hand. You can just raise your hand. We can call on you. If you have any questions or any observations that you made from the documentary. Yeah. Terry.
Maybe not from the documentary, but I found it interesting that the church that you had primarily served the LGBTQ community, and I'm familiar with an Episcopalian congregation in the Pasadena area that very much, I think most of the members there are also part of the community. And I wondered if you were familiar with other churches that were successful and how they became successful, and just inviting people in so that it was all people, not just exclusively one community or the other. Does that make sense?
Back in the 90s, there was a real movement that was happening with, well, just for lack of a better term, we'll say gay churches. And because you didn't really find any churches back then that were gay affirming. You found churches that would be accepting, but like you saw in the documentary, that meant you couldn't be in leadership. They didn't honor your relationship, your marriage. So we formed churches that were specifically for gay people. Although honestly, it wasn't always just gay people. There were some straight people, and there was actually quite a few of them. There's a denomination called UCC or MCC. I'm sorry, MCC, Metropolitan Community Church. It's a worldwide denomination. Reverend Troy Perry started that. Then there was other churches, Christ Chapel churches, and these were all predominantly gay. But what happened as we got more into 2000s, we started seeing denominations that became more open and affirming of gay people. And so now in the 2020s, you find there's a lot of churches like PCUSA, the Episcopalian Church, UCC churches. They're all accepting. And so now you see less and less of just gay churches. You don't really find so many gay churches anymore because now we can fellowship and we can worship with straight people in their churches, and thank God, and that's how it should be, really. We never really wanted to be separate. We just wanted a place where we could be ourselves. So there's actually not that many gay churches anymore. You don't really find too many anymore. But thank God there's churches like this, Pastor Ryan, that if you're gay, you're accepted here, you're embraced here. And even the Catholic Church has come a long way. I never thought in my life that I would see the Catholic Church be so accepting of gay people. That they do. They won't do gay marriage, but they do blessings. Of gay people. So we've come a long way. But thank God we can be integrated and we can be one family because we're all one in Christ. So I hope I answered your question.
Harry.
Kind of related to that, since we have a lot of guests here that are not Presbyterians, can you briefly explain the three denominations of Presbyterian Church? Because not every denomination Presbyterian Church is open.
Yes. So there's a whole lot of Presbyterians. The main ones, if you're referring to some of the main ones, you're talking about the PCA and that's was divided from the PCUSA primarily over the ordination of women in like the 1970s or so, or before that, I think maybe. And then there is another a Presbyterian sort of denomination that has formed recently, if you're talking about that one, ECO. And ECO is the Evangelical Covenant Order of Presbyterians, and it's separated primarily over gay ordination and gay marriage. And that happened, it's now been about, 10, 15 years. And it was really hard. We lost a lot of friends in this period of time, a lot of splits. And it was, a lot of sadness to see, folks you'd come to meetings to and always say, hi, and then all of a sudden you go through this and they're like, I don't really want to say hi to you anymore. And you're like, oh, man. It's just like gnarly. And it's not like they were no one's trying to be mean or anything, I think, in that. I don't want to paint anyone poorly, but I think because of the issue itself, a lot of things were questioned for their theological perspectives, and so they separated. There's other ones too. There's, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. There's not many of those, but they exist. And I think there's another evangelical one. Anyway, Presbyterian Church, by and large, the PCUSA is the one that would be affirming it, but not all PCUSA churches are affirming. So it's not a requirement. It is something for each church to kind of discern, and you are allowed to do gay marriages as pastors and as churches, and also to ordain gay clergy who are married and everything, and that's all good. But you don't have to within the Presbyterian Church. So we have churches within our presbytery who aren't affirming in that way, and some who are. So they still want to talk to me and love me, and I appreciate that greatly. So yeah, that's a little bit about the Presbyterian Church, and particularly this. Dale.
Kind of along that line, so there isn't like a statement from PCUSA about this subject?
The only statement that basically came, the thing that caused all the brouhaha, was it used to say marriage is between one man and one woman in our book of order, and that changed. They added one word. They said it is traditionally between one man and one woman. And functionally what that did was to say, yeah, we acknowledge the history and the tradition of that, but it's not the requirement any longer that the church blesses the marriage of any two people who desire to be in covenant relationship together and remain faithful. Yeah. That's really the only change that happened, and that caused, I think, a big uproar. But also with others, we're like, this had been a conversation in the Presbyterian Church USA for a long time. In some ways, it needed to finally happen. It really did, because there were a lot of tense meetings when you could tell people on both sides. That said, I am so grateful for the people who did not leave our denomination when this change was made. And I'm so grateful for that. I think that's something I'll speak to a little bit later, but that sense of being together in this as one body of Christ, and not letting those certain bugaboos get in the way of our unity. I don't know, bugaboos, it's hard. I don't want to be flippant with this. But what I want to say is there are things in the Bible. Okay, why don't I just talk about it now? Teacher back there is like, just say it, Ryan. So I normally will compare this, and I know not everyone would agree with me, but I compare this to food sacrificed to idols in the Bible. What is that? In the early church, you had Jewish Christians, you had Gentile Christians. And the Jewish Christians, usually, it was pretty hard to be around Gentile Christians, right? Not because of, that was just like they were new. It was because they were so soaked in idolatry. They were taught to think these people as like second class. That's how normally in that setting, the Jewish people would look at Gentiles as like dirty, right? A word like dog would have been used, right? So just to really look down upon the Gentiles. Paul comes along as the apostle, as he says, to the Gentiles, And his entire ministry, and this is not how people read his letters, but if it's there, the entire thing is a unity across boundaries, across walls, across things. He's trying to unite Jews and Gentiles together. And it's been said that if Paul were alive today, he would not recognize what he sees in our churches. He would not recognize the segregation that happened and how the most segregated hour in America is Sunday at 10 a.m., right? He would not recognize how people of, I think, different sexualities, and this is hard because obviously Paul's letters are at stake here, so I want to be careful on this. But he wouldn't recognize how we continue to divide, how we continue to separate, how we continue to other, how we continue to make people lesser than. He just wouldn't recognize it. And so Paul's whole ministry was to bring people together. And that is one of the hardest things about all of this, is to say, so what kind of time are we living in? I think we're living in a really hard time. It's obvious. Where we need to see this, I think the way Paul saw food sacrificed to idols, which was this. Jews would not usually had a really hard time eating with Gentiles, having table fellowship, right? And finally, they kind of got better with it, but they were like, but just we don't want to be around the whole thing with the food sacrifice to idols. Why? Because that's idolatry. It's bad. It's sinful. The Jewish Christians often saw the Gentile Christians as sinful, lesser than. You're not really human. You're not really, Sounds familiar? But Paul was like, no, they are your brothers and sisters. They are saved by grace through faith. This is what all of us are. And so he encouraged the believers to see this and not make that a central issue. However, he acknowledged that for Jews, this was really hard. And it was. And I think it is today. I was raised in a very strong conservative home where I knew all the clobber passages. And it was really, really, really difficult to even think about this or talk about this without getting upset and angry. I know that. And I know what a journey my own heart has been through in this. And how much I think repentance of my own pride has been at stake over many, many, many years. And I think the one thing that I have noticed is this is not an easy process to walk through for anyone, particularly for those who have been othered and outed and hurt and traumatized, I think, by this. And for those who, I don't know if they know if there's a golden bridge to retreat in this. I don't know if you guys know that phrase, but it's like the art of war. And it's one of the old Chinese generals used to say, you got to build them a golden bridge to retreat. Otherwise, they're never going to retreat. They're just going to keep on battling. I don't know if they have a golden bridge to retreat in any way. And I don't know, how do you give them one, right? You want to say, no, you haven't earned that. This is not right. What you've done is not right. But that's where I see this. And I think Paul talked about this in Food Sacrifice to Idols too. How we acknowledge each other as spirit-filled believers. We must acknowledge each other as spirit-filled believers. As our gay Christian friends are filled with the Spirit. They produce the fruits of the Spirit. That is the sign of being filled with the Spirit, right? We know this. So are they Christians? Yes, because they're filled with the Spirit. So this is not about this tiny issue that says, oh, that means they're bad or going to hell or something, which is all the way on that crazy side. But at some point, we need to get beyond ourselves to, at the very least, however we see this thing, I don't think it's about convincing people of a particular view, to acknowledge each other and have table fellowship and covenant communion, like to have communion with Paul, right? If I was still in that space, God would be praised. If I was still in the space where I still saw the Bible the way I saw it, and I still had communion fellowship with you, I think God's name is praised. Yeah. And I hope we can get to that, not our church, but the church, particularly our American church. That's, I guess, all I'll say about that. I know I've spoken a lot here, Paul, if you have anything to add.
I have a question, actually.
Oh, yeah.
This is for Paul. They, a lot of, I can speak to my family's experience where, the rest of the majority of my family is straight, so they kind of
Yeah, thank you. Well, I always knew, like I said, that Jesus was not going to let go of me. I knew it. But because I loved him so much, I didn't want to do something that was a sin. And so I never thought I was going to hell. But I did say to myself, well, I guess I'll have to be alone for the rest of my life. And that's pretty tough when you're a young person. That's really, I mean, it's a terrible thing to say to a young person. You've got to spend the rest of your life alone. You can never have any intimacy. And so, but when I finally came to realize that God wasn't calling me to do that, was in church. It took about 6 months of studying the clobber passages. And I don't know if you guys know why it's called the clobber passages, but it's because when people take the Bible and clobber you with it, thou shalt not, and they try to beat you over the head with the Bible. So we started calling them clobber passages. And so, when I first heard the clobber passages, it didn't make sense right away, quite honestly. It was too much indoctrination to understand it immediately. But after about 5-6 months of really applying myself and being around caring people who kept affirming me and telling me, just, stick with it, you'll understand. You got to pray about it, and God's going to open up your eyes about it. And then it finally did happen to me. And, I remember when I really finally felt completely accepted, I would go to church every Sunday. I would cry for months. It was just such an overwhelming feeling of God's love, and that I could actually be myself, and that was acceptable to God. So I was about, I think I was 23 years old when that happened. Yeah. And so thank God for the people that came before me, and I'm grateful that they, everything I know, I was taught by someone. I didn't come up with any of it, and I'm grateful for the people that really set the stage for me being able to accept myself. Yeah.
Errol.
One of the things that I always concern myself with when we have conversations about things like this are young people, and particularly their relationship with their parents, and that was very evident in the documentary. What are your experiences with parents who might be kind of torn between, oh my gosh, that's like my daughter, I love them, but these are my faith and convictions, about my faith and my walk. What are your experiences in parents and even dealing with it, and children from their perspective, young people, about that conflict that they have?
Sure. Well, I know I was blessed to have 2 wonderful, caring, accepting parents. Maybe at first they were not that they condemned me like I was going to go to hell, but they were more worried I was going to have a hard life. But they accepted me. It was really beautiful how my parents came through for me. So I was really blessed like that. I've seen parents go both ways with their kids. My husband and I, we have a really good friend. When he was just 16 years old, his parents threw him out. They were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they put him on the street. We actually took him in, it was very painful for him, and it's impacted his whole life. It's had an impact on him his whole life to get rejected by his parents. And then I've seen parents who, at first, they thought, this is a sin, the Bible says so, but for the sake of their children, they studied it and they looked into it, and they came to recognize that there had been a misinterpretation. You know, they had their own aha moment. So it does happen. But then, unfortunately, there are a lot of parents who just put their feet down forever and reject their kids. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but it does happen. You know, that's, I think, one of the reasons why suicide's the #1 cause of death for a gay young adult is, you know, suicide. So, you know, for parents who are struggling with it, I would say do a little bit of study. Don't just accept what you've been told. You know, you're going to find out something really different if you study it and you look into it. You'll see that you'll get a different picture. But, you know, even for parents who can't accept it, I would just say love your kids. You know, you got to love them. What was nice in this documentary is even though they didn't come together on their agreement on it, you know, they found that love for each other. You know, so, you know, thank God for that. There is actually a movement of churches. They're called the Third Way churches. And it's churches that agree to disagree. So there's people on both sides of the story, but they agree to disagree. You know, and we can do that too. We can agree to disagree and still love each other. You know, so it's always been strange to me how a parent could actually just completely reject their kid. I've never understood that. So if anyone here is in that situation, I would just say continue to love your kids and look into what the Bible really says. Put some study into it and pray. Ask the Holy Spirit to illuminate the scriptures for you. You know, I'm not telling anyone to just accept it. You know, what we believe is based on a lot of rigorous scholarship. You know, I'm not saying me, but some people way smarter than me even. That we've, you know, we don't just say it. It's not spurious. It's based on a lot of study, prayer, and if you do that too, you'll find out that the Bible doesn't condemn gay people.
I don't need to speak because you crushed that with the parents' question, but you did mention the folks who are doing the study right now, and the scholar, theologian who is the most notable in this, who's recently passed, he passed in 2025, his name is Richard B. Hayes, and he was the chair of biblical studies. I'm probably going to botch what his real role was, but at Duke Divinity School. And he wrote what was considered the preeminent anti-gay sort of theological work. It was called A Moral Vision of the New Testament, and he wrote it in the 90s. I had to read it during seminary because it was always like the #1 thing. And my professor was not, you must believe this. They said, you got to read this because everyone's reading this, right? So I read it, and I always knew, well, I know where Richard B. Hayes stands on all this. It was, I think, 2022, 2023, he co-authored a book with his son basically saying, I was wrong. It was a book called The Widening of God's Mercy. Now, mind you, he was the preeminent author. The reason he was preeminent in this was he wasn't heavy-handed. He wasn't trying to do agenda stuff. He wasn't gay bashing or homophobic. I mean, you could argue all that if you want. But he was trying to make a really cogent case from Scripture why this is not acceptable to God. And as he continued to study, Duke Divinity School chair here, he came to a place where he was like, I don't see it that way anymore. And he wrote that new book called The Widening of God's Mercy. So for anyone, I think, who sits on the side of like, well, you know, the best scholars would, you're like, well, this is a pretty big example here. He was the preeminent voice on one side, and then he said I was wrong on the other. So I always think that's really interesting to me. So that's a book to read if you like to get into heady theological stuff. It's a little less theological than his first one in terms of the audience he was trying to write to, but it still is a good one. Yeah, I thought I'd say that.
I have a friend whose son came out of the closet, and he grieved so hard. How do you deal with a parent who feels guilt, feeling it was his fault that his son escaped?
Oh, like Like he made his son gay, you mean? Or
He feels he did something wrong, you know, in his rearing of his son.
okay, yeah.
And it just would, my friend, who's his wife, would find him just crying
Oh,
and mourning the fact that this happened to his family.
yeah. Well, I believe that we're born this way. It's not a choice. I mean, quite honestly, it's not. It wouldn't be a smart choice, quite honestly, because it's pretty hard to be gay, to grow up gay. It's very difficult. So it's not a choice, is what I would tell him. And so there's nothing the father could have done that would have caused him to be gay. And then I would say he can be set free from that guilt. You know, God can deliver him from that. Yeah, I don't know what's happening with the son. I hope they have a good relationship. Okay. And does the father think it's a sin? Is that part of it, that he thinks it's right? Okay, yeah. For him also, I would say, you know, for your son's sake and your own sake, study the Bible. You know, look into it. Don't just accept what it says. You know, people open the Bible up and they see the word homosexual in there without realizing that it wasn't in there for 1900 years. You know, you didn't find that word in there, and people will just open the Bible up and see that word and say, "Oh, see." But you know, if you love someone, you're going to look into it a little bit more than that. So I would encourage that father to do that.
You know, I also think about grief counselors, and I don't know if anyone has had experience in this, but I can think of a lot of parents who, after a child, let's say, makes a decision, not even a child, it could be a spouse, it could be a friend, and something in their mind, right, something happens, and it's catastrophic, and it's awful, and they hold guilt. This is probably not the same thing in many ways, because it is like you said, there's no choice that was made. But I wonder if there's any way to help that person grieve through this and do it well. And I wonder, is there anyone in the room who has a bit of sage counsel in this? If you've maybe experienced this or have a friend who's gone through this, would you be willing to share? You don't have to, no pressure. Yes?
Well, I know I'm being recorded, but I won't speak for my husband, but I think 32 years ago, 20-something years ago when our son came out, I thought, oh gosh, I shouldn't have let him play with Barbies, and I shouldn't have let him wear pink tutus in the dress box. So you put that guilt on you, and it was great to be able to find a great therapist and talk it out and find out that this was not the case. And we go to St. Joseph next door and had some great priests that were able to talk to us too and just say he's fearfully and wonderfully made. So it's a process, but you can come to the other side. Your friend can come to the other side.
You know, I have a little funny story about that. You know, I grew up, I was into sports. You know, I liked doing, you know, athletic things. My older brother, on the other hand, he wasn't into sports, and he was very gentle. I was rough. He was more gentle. He liked to write poetry, and was just, you know, different than me. And so when I came out to my parents, my mother said, "Well, I would have thought your brother was gay." But he's not. He's not. But so, you know, we're just born this way. It doesn't matter if you played with Barbies, I don't think, or if you know, it's not going to change who you are. Right. Yes. Yeah. Amen. That's a great way to put it. And I believe that's true. That it's not an accident. That God for his own reasons, chose some people to be gay. Yep. And as a matter of fact, that's really when you can say you've come out, is when you can say to yourself, it's a blessing. It's a blessing to be who I am. It's not a curse. It's a blessing. Yeah.
I think in line with that too, one of the things that has worked for us in our ministry is realizing that oftentimes people come out and the response from the people around them is, oh, I already am.
Right. Yeah.
And so we have found that that's very revealing too, of the fact that sometimes it takes longer to accept ourselves than
Right.
what other people see.
Yes.
But my question is along the lines of the fact that in the documentary, the interaction between the daughter and the father was very painful. The daughter had a yearning to have a closer relationship to her father. And you could say that she did, but even in the conversation about how she wants to describe to her dad, so are we just talking about the weather? And that's tragic. And she had to accept the fact that she was going to be okay with that type of relationship, because if you continue to fight, you're still trying to have a different type of relationship. So my question is, if you've had a lot of experience with communications with people that are not aligned with how you feel or how you see things, how do you know when to stop?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually learned over the years to stop pretty quick. Because, you know, in one conversation, you're not going to convince anyone. And most of the time, my experience has been people who are really, really set against it don't change their mind too often. What the people who do change actually is when you do have a family member. That's actually when I do see people change their mind, is because they have a kid or a family member. But other people, you know, we were talking at our Bible study last night about, we have some people that post online about being LGBT and Christian, and they get a lot of haters. And they were talking about, you know, responding to haters. And, you know, I used to post online a long time ago, and I remember I used to respond to every single hater. And, you know, not one of them ever changed their mind. Not one time. So I stopped doing it. Unless people really come to me who want to engage, I drop it pretty quick. I just try to say, you know, something if they're Christian, like, well, we're all saved by grace. You know, the same way as sinners saved by grace. So can we agree on that? And so I don't push it. Yeah, but if they come to me and want more questions, then I'll keep the conversation going.
Is this a worldwide phenomenon, the mistranslation? Because we're talking about the American Standard Bible, but I'm assuming worldwide that interpretation has been made across languages, pretty much.
That's such a good question, Eric, because I think people don't use the English when they're translating other languages. I think that would be a really bad move. John Grimes would probably be able to tell us more. I think they use the Greek and the Hebrew, so they're going off of some of that. However, the resources and tools that people use to determine what those words mean can be already, I don't want to use such a strong word, but kind of I should, corrupted. So if you're consulting maybe some sort of dictionary of like Greek and Hebrew, it could have already led you down that path. But my experience, though, a really good Hebrew-Greek dictionary would not do that to you. So I don't know if it's corrupted in that sense. The other side of this too is you saw the documentary. A lot of did you notice how much of it is also very contextual to America? Right? It is. It's very contextualized to America. This is not necessarily something that would hit the same in all different places and in the same way. So I don't know if it has, but I think it's a great question. I just don't know the answer to it. But I know people would use the Greek and the Hebrew to translate. So you can only pray to God that they didn't in other places. Like we kind of have a mess here with that. Yeah. I don't know. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, I
Ian?
think that makes sense. Yep. I'm going to have to say I'm coming up with a little bit of a blank. I haven't really studied it in other languages besides English, Greek, or Hebrew. So that's a great question. Yeah, I'm going to actually go look into that. Yeah, Michael. Yeah, he was a really hurt young man. I mean, first we told him that he has a Father in heaven who loves him, and God's love is really a cure for a lot of things, and we just always told him how much we loved him, yeah, and that he could be happy, that he could find happiness as a gay person, because for him at that time it was like a death sentence to be who he was. He felt like, and he was suicidal, very suicidal, and but we encouraged him that he could have a fulfilling life, and that he was loved, and that there was a Father in heaven who loved him, and yeah, we just saw him recently. We were in Hawaii, and he's been with his same partner now for 30 years. They made a life for themselves in Hawaii. And he's doing great now. Yeah, his name's Paul also. Yeah.
Great question. Yeah, Nick.
So I have a question. What kind of advice would you give to somebody? Our niece has recently come out, and her parents are completely unaccepting. But we're not. But there's only so much. What kind of advice would you give to us as far as how do we navigate through that?
Okay, so it's your niece, and so so her family doesn't accept her, but you guys do. That's beautiful. I mean, sometimes a young person needs just at least one anchor in their life, to have stability. So I would, encourage you to just continue to love her, yeah, and tell her, talk about God's unconditional love for her. And,
We're worried about where's the balance with what we say versus turning the parents away from us.
right.
We lose some access,
Sure. Well, I mean, you don't necessarily have to talk about the theology of being gay. I would hope that they accept that God's love is unconditional, that it's always there for us. You know, it's always accessible, and that she can have a good relationship with God no matter who she is. I don't know. That's a good question, because what are her parents going to do if you try to talk to her about the clobber passages? I don't know. That might create a problem. Yeah, but I think if you stick with God's love and affirm her. Young people need affirmation. When you don't get any affirmation, there was a study done on young gay people that they hear an enormous amount of negative affirmation all throughout the day. You hear the word, gay uses a pejorative constantly. People use that word, and so it builds up over time. If every day you're hearing negative affirmation, it wears you down. So affirm this. Sorry, is it a boy or girl? Got it. Affirm them. Yeah. Sure. Beautiful, yeah.
Also, I wanted to add, we have, Erin and I, we have a middle school, well, she's going into high school now, and her friend circle is very diverse, and she has some friends in the community, and because of what they've experienced with other Christian people, they were very hesitant to hang out with her, with us, or to come talk to us, or just in general go places. And we had to remind our daughter, babe, and the one thing I said, and I would say to anybody, I said, our Christianity is what Jesus said. All the law and his prophets say two things. You love God and with everything in you, and you love your neighbor like you love you. And I said, how can we not love you, love your friends, if your friends love you, right? So she goes back to her little friend community, and then she's like, okay, we want to go hang out. Okay, let's do it. And we do that, right? We didn't talk about Jesus, we didn't talk about love, we didn't talk about dead names, we didn't talk about anything. We just said, let's go have Chipotle and go to the bookstore. And you know what? We went to Chipotle to the bookstore, but the report came back said, Mom, they had so much fun with us, and we didn't even do anything. And I don't think that people understand that the bar is so low. The bar is on the ground, guys. And if we just love people, and if we just love people, like I can just
I guess it is true, right, that actions do speak louder than words. Yeah. If you model that love, that's beautiful that your family could do that.
She's a member of our church, Paul.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Steve had to leave, but he had a question. And do you know if our seminaries throughout the country are changing what they are teaching as far as interpretation goes?
You know, it's a kind of a dilemma. It's a dilemma. Most seminaries, I would say, no, not. But there are some that do, but there also happen to be seminaries that are not really totally Christian anymore. Yeah. 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 So I mean, so you do. There are seminaries that yes, that you can be gay. But
So I was really proud. So Fuller had this interesting statement they made. And they recently, it must have been about a year ago, they basically came out with a comment like a third way comment, a third way statement on this. And it was pretty gnarly because a lot of people, I mean, Fuller had never done this before. They had been very clear, you must be celibate or monogamous, heterosexual marriage, and they always said that. And so this time they said the same thing, and they said, but we don't presuppose to know all, like, the mind of God in this. And they actually had a great humility. So in some ways, they decided to take the next step, and they just decided to have an epistemological humility. And that is a long term for basically just saying, I don't think I know everything. And it's wild for a seminary to do that, because you want seminaries, you should know everything and then teach your students everything. Well, there is everything, and you can talk about Jesus, and that's Jesus everything, right? So let's go through that, and let's go through some of these things. But there are a lot of things where, once again, Spirit-filled believers on all sides. Fuller sees that, and they're like, that's the evidence. That's the proof. For us, like, you can take the Bible and you can do a lot of stuff with it if you want. People have for a long time. What the proof is, what the evidence is where is the Spirit working? And they see Spirit working through gay believers. So how can we debate all of that? Like, it's really hard. So I love that Fuller did that. It didn't go far enough for some, obviously. But I was really grateful that as a seminary, one of the preeminent seminaries in our nation, they made that statement. I don't know what that means practically. And I don't know what student life is like. That's another thing. You'd have to be a student there to really tell what's the actual vibe like. Is it just they're just saying something and the reality is different? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, let's hope that changes, but it doesn't seem likely. Yeah.
It is 7:10. And this is great. We were supposed to end at 7, but just some great questions at the end there, and all sorts of things. So we're going to end our time together. Thank you for coming here. Can you please thank Paul? This is really good having you here, Paul. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. And so we'll when we leave. What we'd like to do, if you're willing to stay and help, just kind of doing some cleanup and things. That's always something, church stuff, if you're willing to stay. We also have this incredible program. I need some of you to look around at the carpets and see the stains that have shown up and realize that's because we have this most epic summer program going on right now with kids. Yes! And we don't need to clean the carpets till it's done. So we want to see more stains. But we do. We don't care. It's just great. But here's what we need to do. We need to set up to make more stains around here. So we'll set up the tables and such. If you're willing to stay and help and clean up, that'd be great. One more thing. If you're willing to come to the next event, we'll do it in here as well with a meal and everything. And it's going to be called Go By it's like sword with a strike through and it says gun. And it's going to be talking about the Christian ethics and violence, especially pertaining to firearms and things like that. And we'll be watching a series of videos created by various scholars in our tradition, and they'll be discussing this. That's another kind of hot button topic, but as we talk about life through the lens of faith, it is important. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Be safe. Hope to see you tomorrow too as well. Bye.